I'm sure after hearing that gospel, many of you felt that's not fair. I mean, what is the Lord really saying to us? Why should the person who works 1 hour get the same wage as someone who works 6 or 8 hours? It just isn't the way I would do things. That's not what I would do. And then you pause for just a minute, reflect on that. That's not what I would do. And go back to the first reading. That's the reading from Isaiah, the prophet. Do you remember how he reminded us of what Christ had said? It is not my ways, but yours. It is not my words, but yours that you're trying to do. So the Lord is trying to say, listen and hear my words and follow and do my ways. So this gospel seems to be, challenging us to take a step back, to remind ourselves that what we need is a new perspective on who I am, and a new view on what God is doing in my life, a new way of looking at it, seeing it, understanding it. This parable, then, I think is important to know. It's not about compensation or wages. It is really about blindness. A blindness I have about who I am, and a blindness I have about what God is doing in my life. That's what the Lord is asking. Remove the blindness, see my ways, hear my words. That's the lesson I should take away from this rather complex but very enlightening particular gospel. So the Lord, as is changing me, is telling me about a new way of seeing myself. Maybe a parable from the Middle East. This parable or story is told by the Jesuit Anthony de Mello. He is a spiritual writer, a reflector in theology. And he tells the story, the fable, of something from the Middle East. He said there was a man who was walking in the forest, and there he came across a fox who was only 3 legs. He wondered how the fox could possibly survive, unable to hunt, being disabled with only 3 legs. And then he watched, and in a surprising way, there was a tiger a little ways away from the fox. The tiger had killed another animal and was eating it, but he left some and walked away, enough for the fox to eat and remain healthy and whole. The man marveled at this particular way and said, "Look how God cares for us. Look how God takes care of us." So he decides that he will too have greater trust in God. I will trust God the same way. So it is he stays where he has been staying in the forest, and he waits for God to feed him, take care of him, as he surely did the fox. And he waits, and he waits. It is several days. He is already growing very weak from no food and no water. Nothing has come. God has not brought anything at all. He begins to pray. What is wrong? You cared for this, the little creature, and you will not care for me, your son? And another day goes by. He grows even weaker under the sun and the burden of no food. And suddenly he hears a voice, and the voice tells the man, "Why do you identify yourself with this disabled fox and instead not identify yourself with the capable tiger?" It is the difference in how you see yourself to know how God cares for you. That's some great wisdom, isn't it? How I see myself. Sometimes there are times in my life when I really do see myself in different ways. I see myself as perhaps more the person who is wounded than I do the person who is healed. Sometimes I see myself as the one that's isolated and alone, rather than the one that is gathered and called. Sometimes I assume that I am the one unloved by God and not the one called the daughter and son of God. Somehow I feel that God has at times singled me out and I bear a greater burden than all the other people, instead of recognizing how my God has lifted me up and forgiven me and showed me great compassion. You see, I think what the Lord is trying to do is trying to help me see the truth here of who I really am. I am that daughter and son. I am not someone broken and defected. And even in my sin and my failure, even in my weakness and discouragement, I can find in God mercy and love, compassion and understanding. That's how I see myself. But only if I change perspective. You see, one of the greatest ways of making yourself miserable is just to keep comparing yourself with everybody else. You see, when I compare myself with other people, what I do is, I compare all my lack with your abundance. I compare my weakness with all your strengths. So I never win, do I? I always come off short. I always come off somehow less. I don't see the goodness. I don't understand the abilities. I overlook the blessings. And so in this parable it says, look at yourself more closely, more completely, and see how God has indeed called you the daughter, named you the son, and blessed you. But it means changing your perspective. I may be wounded, but I'm also healed. I may be sinful, but I'm also forgiven. I may feel alone, but I am part of this family of faith. I may think God has abandoned me, but I remember the God who said, I will shepherd you. That's the difference in perspective. That's the blindness I need to remove. That's the lesson of part of this gospel. But then it reminds me, too, to look again and see the blessings around me. There are blessings of family and friendships. There are blessings given to me of work and abundant living. There are blessings of those who have stood by me in tough times. There is the strength I found when I was challenged. There is the goodness I've seen inside of me when only before I saw darkness. There are all kinds of blessings, but it means, again, removing the blindness, finding a new perspective, recognizing that blessings are not earned, but given. I don't have to do something to merit God's love. It is always bestowed. And perhaps one final story from my own life that might help. When I was a young boy, probably first or second grade, my parents decided to take all of us, my brothers, to South Carolina. We were going down there to visit some family members and spend some vacation along the shore. And as we drove down there, that was all new to me as a young boy. And so we went to a restaurant. It was some morning that we were driving. It was in the Carolinas, and the waitress, we ordered, and in the middle of my plate came a small white glob of food I had never seen in my life. But everybody else had the same white glob on their plate. I didn't say anything, being too young. My other brother, older than I and much more outgoing, said to the waitress as he pointed to the white glob on his plate, "I didn't order that. What is it?" And the waitress, in a very southern hospitality, said, "Oh, honey, that grits." And he said, "But I didn't order grits." And she said, "Oh, honey, you don't order grits, they just come." You don't order, they just come. That's God's blessing. You don't merit it, it just comes. You didn't earn it, it's just bestowed. You didn't gain it, it was just freely given. That's the perspective. It is not about just wage and compensation. It's about removing the blindness and seeing who we are, blessed and loved, forgiven and chosen. And it's seeing the blessedness in everyday life. Then you'll see that that story is about God giving us what we need, enough for what we have to face, sufficient for the challenge before us. It's about getting enough. Whether we are worthy of it or not is not the answer. Whether we have worked in the harvest all our lives or a short time is not the question. God will love me and God will give me what is sufficient. I may need to change my perspective, renew who I am in God's eyes, and know what God's done with blessings. I need to know it's not my ways, but God's, not my words, but God's.